Brian, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jamie, do we have that PowerPoint that sort of shows the agenda that we're going through tonight?
Yes, we do. It can be put up really soon.
Okay, we'll put that up on the screen, and I'll do a quick explanation of what I hope we're doing tonight. Normally, we have an annual general meeting once a year. This is a statutory requirement because we are a registered charity under the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. And we have to have this, and we normally have it in person. And at that meeting, we approve several motions, and we also elect any officers and executive members that whose terms are expiring that year. So I'm could you maybe go to the next slide? And how about one more?
And one more.
Yeah, why not? Okay. So what we're going to do tonight is there will be 4 motions that need to get passed. And we're going to do this nice and quickly so that we can get to our great speaker and listen to Elizabeth's birds and not too much later than usual. In order to make this work, the motions you will see, or I will explain the motions. You should also see them on the slides. I'll read them out, and then we will need a person from the floor, that's somebody attending the meeting, to become the person who proposes it. This just means that somebody will have to put their hand up and say their name, and they will be the proposer, and then there will be a seconder. Then we're supposed to vote on these things. In a normal meeting, it would be all in favor, all opposed. We can try doing things like waving hands if people want to, or saying yay if you support the motion, which I hope you all do. The really important thing, though, is if anybody is opposed, I will ask that, and if you are opposed, I will need you to say your name so you can record, or so that we can record the number of people to make sure that we actually did pass the motion. I don't expect this to be complicated. I hope it isn't. So the first of the 4 motions that we're going to do deals with approving last year's AGM minutes. And these were published in the February 2021 Curlew, the Curlew that just came out. And this is just a very straightforward thing. So I would ask if someone attending can move to approve the AGM minutes of February 28th.
I move that. I've unmuted myself, Jamie. Is that okay?
Yep, that's great. So Margaret Bain
Yes.
has moved it, and we need a seconder.
Second.
That's Elizabeth. And all in favor, just wave your hands or say yay or something. I see a bunch of waving hands. And more importantly, okay, is anyone opposed? Okay, is there anybody opposed? Okay, I will say that that motion was carried. That's 1 out of 4 down. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. And maybe we can switch briefly to Dan Kelly, our treasurer, in case he wishes to say a couple of words. Dan has published his financial report in the Curlew.
Yes, unfortunately, I posted all our reports online, but the link was never included in the Curlew, so I guess nobody got a chance to see them. I do have something here. I don't know if I can share this or not. And I don't know if you want to go through it in detail, or if you want to just go through the overview.
I think not, because I think we put a note in there to say that they could contact you if anybody had any concerns or issues. And assuming that nobody has contacted.
Well, I have had one person with a concern that we're not being audited, which is a concern of mine as well. It's always nice to be covered. But the lady that did audit us, Marg McCauley, will not do it anymore. She says that there is a problem with the CICA, I guess. So we've decided to go ahead without the audit at this point. It's
If
up
I
in the
could
air. Yeah.
make a comment about that, at the Northumberland Land Trust had a special meeting this week, and they had to do a review of books, which is, I think, what the person was proposing. The lowest quote they could get was $2,500 to do it. So for an organization of our size,
Can't do
with
it.
the amount of assets,
that's-
we used to be able to do it on a volunteer basis, but I think as long as we have oversight, and I think even if a volunteer from within the club offered to vet the numbers, that would be probably welcomed in the future. Am I correct?
Yeah, I'd be happy with that, because like that's 10% of our total assets just to get the books looked at.
I know, and that was the lowest quote.
Yeah.
Others were much higher.
Yeah.
So. Fair enough. Shall we just go ahead and put this motion to the floor?
Yes.
Alrighty. So could I have somebody to move to accept the 2020 financial report as presented in the Curlew?
I so move, Brian. Richard Pope.
Okay, got that? So that's Richard. And a seconder, please.
I know.
Okay. Could I'm not seeing anybody.
I will second that, Margaret Bain.
Okay, Margaret. Oh, I saw somebody later on. Okay, could we? Okay,
They're all drinking wine.
could we have a all in favor, please?
Aye.
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 Okay, what about opposed? Is anybody? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, so I will say that that one is carried also.
Good man, Brian. Good man.
And we are listening to the person who had concerns. Okay, next slide, please. And this is really just to let the existing board off the hook for what they did since the last AGM. So could we please have a motion to confirm the actions of the executive board since the last AGM on February 28th, 2020? Somebody to move it, please.
I so move, Richard Pope.
Okay. And a seconder?
Don Davis, I'll second that.
Thanks, Don. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections?
Sleeping in this, posing just to get things going.
Okay, that is carried also. So we go on to the final slide, and this is the last thing we have to do as part of the AGM. So one more slide, please. Now I'm wearing my hat as past president. I become the chair of the nominating committee, and the role of that committee is to find candidates who are not only willing to fill in vacancies that come up in the board and the executive, but also to make sure those candidates have the skill sets that meet the club's requirements. So we have director, 6 executive members. 3 of those directors' terms expire this year. And there are 4 positions that expired or are due for election in the executive. And those 4 positions are the president, the first and second vice president, and the treasurer. Now, we do have 3 candidates for directors for the 3 positions, and they're all incumbents. So they all have the experience, they know what they're getting into. We have candidates for first vice president and president, and those are the existing second vice president and first vice president. And we have a candidate for treasurer who is also the incumbent. The one position we do not have, and it's listed as TBA on the slide here, is for a second VP. This is not a big issue because this is basically a learning role, and it's something that the executive can appoint during the year once we find somebody suitable. So I would like to have a motion, and we want to have a single vote, again, yea or nay for the complete slate, simply because of time. I should point out that we put a note in both January and February curlews inviting any other nominations at the time to make themselves known to the secretary. Micah did not receive any such contacts. So I'm going to ask somebody to propose this motion, and I'll go through the names again. So we're moving that as a slate, we vote for, and I should say for the executive, these are for a one-year term, and that's by mutual agreement with all the candidates. And for the 3 directors, it's for a 2-year term. So, and again, it's for Frank Godfrey for 1 year, for president, Whitney Lake for 1 year, for vice president, first vice president, Dan for 1 year, Dan Kelly as treasurer, and for Gina Brower, Brian Cook, and Jenny Jackman as directors for 2 years. Could I have a motion from the floor, please?
I so move, Richard Pope.
Thank you, Richard, and a seconder.
I'll second. Fine, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All in favor?
And anyone opposed? I would say that is carried, and I believe that ends my role as part of the AGM, and we can get on to more interesting things. So thank you very much for your indulgence, and we will resume to a more normal procedure next year, I assume.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. You did a good job. I really appreciate it. Frank? Frank? Frank,
Yes, Tim.
you're on.
Okay, so Tim,
Yes, dear.
you're going to introduce Elizabeth?
No, you are.
Oh, I'm going to.
Yes,
Okay, I like
you're the
change.
president.
I like change of plans. So Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Bird sightings. You're on.
Okay. So what's everybody been seeing? I can't see all the people now, so here we go. Speaker view. No, I can't see them. Okay.
Now, where's the multiple screen? Where's the grid screen here?
Sorry, Carol?
I'm just wondering how to put the grid screen on so we can see all the faces, or because I've got
We'll
you.
have to do that, please.
I'd rather look at the birds.
Yes, I can. Yeah, okay.
Richard.
The faces, who's commenting, please?
Yeah, I'm
That was
afraid
Richard.
you can't put your screen on the multiple camera view when we're sharing a document
Okay.
like this.
Wait,
Okay, got it.
we don't need to see those. That's okay. Has anybody recently seen the snowy owl in Coburg Harbor?
Apparently it's moved to the hospital. It
Oh,
was on Burnham Street, just as you turn to go to the hospital. And last year and years before, sometimes they've been up on that area. But several people have told me they've seen it up there and not at the harbor.
Do you think it's the same bird, Margaret?
Apparently,
Okay, because it might not be.
yeah.
But with the ice frozen a bit, the owl might be out on the lake at the edge of the ice. They would hunt ducks and gulls and things at the edge of the ice. So it might not be the same one.
Yeah.
I think it is.
We've had one interesting visitor at our feeder this winter. One bird, we've seen it 5 times since the 10th of November. One tufted titmouse.
Mhm.
Should not be in Ontario, but it's never here longer than about 3 minutes at a time. And it's, you know, I haven't told anybody because there's no point in me coming because you probably won't see it. And it's about a month apart with each sighting. 10th of November, sometime in early December, 25th of December, 25th of January, and this past Monday. So it's well spaced apart. We have no idea where it is when it isn't here, but yeah. So how many hundreds of red poles is everybody getting? Yeah.
I've got hordes of pine siskins.
Pine siskins?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the first pine siskins I've heard of in a while, Eleanor.
Oh, there's about 30 of them here. No red poles, but
Okay.
pine siskins and mixed with a few goldfinches.
We have lots of waxwings and no pine finches and goldfinches.
Huh. Well, the red poles took a long time to find our feeder. They just come this week. We've had robins in our mountain ash in the front yard. Anybody have any waxwings?
Yeah, cedar and bohemian.
You have bohemian still at your place, Jim? Yeah.
Yeah,
And cedar as well.
different flocks.
Like they're separated, they're not together, but one day we'll see one and the other next day we'll see the other.
Okay.
Grant Elliott here. I've actually seen two sightings. One day I saw two of the owls at the lake, and a couple of days before that I actually saw also a bald eagle circling the harbor.
Okay. Bald eagles are not uncommon in Coburg Harbor in the winter time. Every time they go up in a terrible roar, we think that there might be an eagle. But I was down there the other day, and it was somebody flying a drone.
Oh my goodness.
That got the gulls quite excited. But I think it's something.
Actually, I actually had a picture of the owl, the snowy owl on the pole in the boat compound, and then he got very agitated, and I looked around and there was a second snowy owl flying around, and then the second owl flew away and he became much more relaxed.
When was that?
That was about 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Katsu, you've had the snowy on the pole some in the Coburg Harbor too, a couple of weeks ago, I think. Yeah. And I don't know if he's here, but Jean Simard had a juvenile white crowned sparrow in his garden this week. That's an unusual bird for the winter. They're usually migrating by now.
Unusual.
Or they're usually further south. They're not migrating back. It's probably a wintering bird. Simone, what have you seen lately? Simone and Anne are usually out somewhere.
Okay, I have two red-bellied woodpeckers this morning at our feeders, male and female.
Okay.
And during the week, there were two rough-legged hawks between Coburg and Port Hope.
Two, okay.
Yeah.
They're doing it.
Oh.
I have lots of red poles at my feeder. They're wiping out my Niger seed every couple of days. So it stayed at my house.
I guess we'll have to come over to your place if I want to see a big crowd.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I had a northern shrike north of Centerton on February the 4th.
Okay.
And then on the 22nd, Merlin on Ontario Street. And also on the 22nd, a blackback gull down at Lucas Point Park.
Okay. I think you bird at Lucas Point more than anybody else in this crowd.
Yeah.
Recently.
Also a lot of house finches down there.
Okay. Well, that's interesting too, because house finches have been scarce a little bit. Anne, have you heard anything from your owls lately? Anne has had great horned owls singing in her backyard south of Baltimore.
Oh.
You're muted. You're muted, Anne. I can't hear you.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't heard the owl lately, but I'm sure, now that I usually go out for a bit of a walk in the evening. Haven't heard it recently, but I'm sure I will. Well, I think I emailed you the other day because I had a brown creeper.
Yeah.
And I've had pine systems too, so, but not only one redpoll.
Okay, thank you. And Anne did have a eastern screech owl calling from her garden.
Yes,
In the last
yeah.
Yeah, that's not a usual backyard bird. Catherine, what's doing in your yard?
Well, I am sure I'm hearing, it may be 2 great horned owls in Welcome.
Okay.
And I had a whole bunch of redpolls the other day.
We'll have to go out in the evening.
And some robins, but I'm thinking they're not the migrants. I'm thinking they're ones that have been here. Because I have multiflora rose hips.
Yes.
And they hang around the bottom of my yard.
There have been quite a few wintering robins because there was a pretty good fruit crop last fall. There was a lot of riverbank grape, and they will eat that in the winter. In my own front yard, I have a small mountain ash tree, and the robins have moved in there once it got cold, particularly. Yeah.
Hi, it's Courtney.
Yeah, hi Courtney. What do you
I'm just reporting we had we've had lots of evening grosbeaks throughout the winter.
They stayed at your place. Other people have they moved on.
Yeah, and we've had a pine grosbeak this morning on our way to school on the side of the road. And then we had, a juvenile white-throated sparrow as well. And also a barred owl on the way to school. Yeah.
On Nagle Road.
On Nagle Road.
Got to school. I'm not sure I would have got to school. Lots of barred owls around this year.
Yeah.
Many barred owls. The February curlew reported 10 from all over the county, and we don't capture everyone that's seen. So that's quite a good haul, I think. Yeah.
Did you want one more report here, Elizabeth? I go back to January 22nd. We had 70 redpolls here at our place.
Okay.
And 22 goldfinch that particular day. And then they all disappeared. I had 20 redpolls come back on February 4th. And we have had 4 pair of cardinals every day. We've had them here. We've had pileated woodpecker in the vicinity, and the redpolls returned today. I had 12 of them. So they definitely came south.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Richard, what do you got? You've got lots of gulls in the harbor, I know.
People hate gulls, but I'll tell you anyway. We have had good gulls all week. We've had up to 1,000 birds on 2 days and averaging about 500. And we've had great blackback and lesser blackback gulls. We've had 6 different Iceland gulls and at least 3 different glaucous gulls. And of course, a ton of herring gulls, and the ring-billed gulls have now gone from about 30 or 40 up to 300, because around this time of year, they usually start replacing the herring gulls. So it's been a very good week for gulls if you happen to be there at the right time and an eagle or a harrier hasn't gone by and put everybody up. So the gulls have been good. And also as a footnote to the redpolls, in downtown Coburg, Margaret and I have shared 50 redpolls for the last couple of months. They're either in my garden or they seem to go over to her garden. They seem to fly back and forth across town. Although today they dropped down suddenly to 15 birds and Margaret had about 20. So maybe they're starting to thin out because this 50 that's been in town have been pretty regular. So.
Did I make a report from Kawartha Lakes?
Sure, of course.
We, my husband and I have had redpolls all winter, about 30
and goldfinches, about 20. But we drove up through Copaconk to Shadow Lake the other day, and we were there in time to see 32 trumpeter swans.
Oh, my.
They are increasing fantastically. 20 used to be a really unheard of number to report on eBird, but we counted 32 because none of the other lakes were open. This was the only open water, and so it put them all together. And then in our yard during the week, we had a sharp-shinned hawk come in. One day it didn't get anything, but the next day it did get a common redpoll. So it was able to have breakfast that day.
I had a sharpshin carry off one of my cardinals.
There were 2 trumpeter swans in Coburg Harbor sometime in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
They're not regular, but they've been there when the water's open. Because it's been open.
They're not tagged either. They're not tagged birds.
Yeah.
And there's a pair of them. They come off and on.
Yeah. They could be wild bred.
The east side of Lindsay in Dunsford, there have been 200 snow buntings and 1 Lapland longspur. But we've been a couple of times and haven't seen a longspur, and the snow buntings are decreasing. So I think they're going back up north.
Yeah, the snow buntings are a bit irregular, and although 2 weeks ago, Roger and I saw about 2,000 in the field north of Burnham's on Apple Orchard Road. It was a huge number. So anyway, thank you. And in the next month is when the waterfowl come back usually. So keep your eyes out on any place you have open water. There might be huge numbers of waterfowl. There will probably not be a waterfowl festival at Presqu'île, but doesn't mean you can't go anyway. The ducks will still be there. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, and the subject of this evening is an illustrated talk on the mysterious, seldom seen nocturnal rodent called the flying squirrel. I've had experience with the flying squirrel, not one I would want to talk to Dr. Jeff about. Anyway, I want to welcome Dr. Jeff Bowman, a professor at Trent University, a research scientist in the Wildlife Research and Development section of the M&R Flying Squirrel. We will learn tonight that flying squirrels are beautiful and useful creatures that without them, our lives and forests would lose many values. There are more than 40 species of flying squirrels worldwide, including the cave-dwelling woolly flying squirrel of Pakistan, which survives slowly on a diet of pine needles. God, the poor guy. Jeff has come to talk to us about the only 2 species of flying squirrels found in North America. These flying squirrels are relatively rare and are adapted in many ways to our boreal and temperate forests. Dr. Jeff, thank you for coming, and I welcome you wholeheartedly. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. So I'm just going to share my screen. I have some okay.
There we are.
Okay, so you can all see that opening slide?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Great. Yeah, so again, thanks for the invitation. I'm going to talk about, as was just described, the flying squirrels that we have in Ontario. Some of you may have seen episodes of The Nature of Things a couple weeks ago that had that I was on and that talked about flying squirrels, you may have seen in those episodes some black lights, these kind of pink lights that I'm showing here on this screen. But if you didn't, I'm going to explain a little bit. Black lights are there. We've had the occasion just in the last couple of years to have quite a number of documentary filmmakers come out and film flying squirrels at our sites. And the chances are that if you've seen video footage of gliding squirrels in the forests in the last decade or so, that they were filmed at this site in the Kawartha Highlands, which is one of our main study sites, and it's just a great spot for flying squirrels. And I'm going to talk more about that site as I give my presentation. I work for the Wildlife Research and Monitoring section of the MNRF. I live in Peterborough, and I work actually at Trent University in what we call the DNA building. And I started working on flying squirrels when I first got the job at the MNR. I'm also on the faculty at Trent. Started in 2001, and my first flying squirrel project was in 2002. And that work started because at that time, some of you may recall, the southern flying squirrel was listed by COSEWIC as a species of special concern. So there was a need to do a reassessment of that species at that time. So that was sort of what motivated my interest in flying squirrels initially, was to provide some data for the reassessment that was happening. Back in those days, I had young kids, and I had a lot less gray hair than I have now. Those are my two kids, my son, my daughter, and they've been coming out doing flying squirrel research with me since they were born. Like my son was born in 2002, so the first year that I did flying squirrel work. So I can date the length of my flying squirrel research experience from the age of my son. And he's just turned 19 this year, so that tells you something. So what is a flying squirrel? Well, as you just heard, it is a rodent. It's part of the squirrel family. There are around 43 species of flying squirrel. There's actually a third species in North America that was recently described. It's the Humboldt's flying squirrel, which is on the west coast of the US, sort of in California, Washington, Oregon. And it was always thought to be the northern flying squirrel. So much like the case with birds, sometimes there's a two species recently, including this one in California. But in any case, flying squirrels are probably more accurately called gliding squirrels because they can't actually fly. They always lose elevation when they leave, when they jump. But it's basically a controlled fall. But they can go a long way. They can go about 3 times as far as they are high. So if they were 30 feet up in a tree, then they could glide for about 90 feet, something like that. They're part of the squirrel family. So this is a phylogeny of the squirrel family. And I just wanted to point out that this is a clade. We call this a clade. So this is the group of flying squirrels. All of these are different squirrel species, and this group here are the flying squirrels. And if you go back, they split off from other squirrels quite a long time ago, and their common ancestor with the rest of the squirrels is this animal right here, which is the red squirrel. So this is our North American red squirrel, and it has a common ancestor with the flying squirrels. But they evolved in Southeast Asia, in fact, and that's the area with the most diverse fauna of flying squirrels. There's a few dozen flying squirrel species in Southeast Asia, and we only have the 3 here. So I've shown on this slide that there are actually a bunch of other gliding mammals. They're not all flying squirrels, but all the gliding mammals have quite a similar body shape. So there's a kind of convergence in the design of a gliding mammal. There are flying squirrels, which are gliding. There's a colugo, some of you may have heard of. And there's also the marsupial sugar gliders, which are very similar looking to flying squirrels. So that is a sugar glider, which is not, it's very distantly related from flying squirrels because it's a marsupial that evolved in Australia, but it has very similar features. It's nocturnal. It's got the same patagium. The patagium is the membrane that goes from the wrist to the ankle. It forms the sail. It uses its tail as a rudder, just like a flying squirrel. So these are, obviously effective traits for this kind of gliding lifestyle because they have evolved independently several times. This is a dwarf flying squirrel, which is from Japan and is the smallest flying squirrel species. There's the red giant flying squirrel. These are just some examples. And yes, you heard about the woolly flying squirrel. This is a squirrel, which is one of the larger flying squirrel species that was thought to be extinct. And this was really, and this gentleman, Peter Zoller, was in the sort of Pakistan, Afghanistan area, and he was in a market and discovered this material that was being sold in the market, and became curious about it and asked about where it came from. And it turned out to be the solid crystalline urine of this woolly flying squirrel that was being sold for medicinal properties. And he asked these vendors, about where this was coming from, and it was, they took him up to these caves, and he was the one who identified that this is a squirrel species that was thought to be extinct by Western science. And so since that time, there's been great interest in this squirrel species, which does exist on a diet of pine needles, the only mammal that eats only pine needles. And that's why it produces this crystalline urine product. It has a very arid lifestyle. Living in a cave, quite different from ours. We have two species of flying squirrel, the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. The northern flying squirrel is bigger. It's the one on the left in that picture. And it has a boreal forest distribution, and the southern flying squirrel has this sort of distribution in the eastern temperate forest. These two species evolved in separate refugia. They were isolated from one another by glaciers, right, during the last ice age. The northern flying squirrel was sort of on the northern side of the glaciers, and the southern flying squirrel evolved in southeast United States in a different refugia. So they evolved in isolation from one another. The southern flying squirrel is adapted to acorns, beech nuts, hickory nuts, and that sort of thing. The northern flying squirrel has a much more sort of diet that's specialized on things you could find in the boreal forest, but particularly it's a mycophagus, so it eats fungus. It's got a diet on like hypogeous fungus, in particular truffles. It also eats lichen. It's important in the way in its role though, because of potential ecosystem effects that it can provide through its mycophagus behavior. Because trees can't fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere, so they need to be provided with nitrogen. So we forest, a lot of that nitrogen comes from flying squirrel fecal pellets because they are eating fungus that have nitrogen fixing bacteria associated with the fungus. And in their fecal pellets, they spread the spores of the fungus and the nitrogen fixing bacteria, and they deposit those around the floor of the forest, providing new fungal colonies that can then become in a symbiotic relationship with tree roots. And so the trees are providing nutrients to the fungus. And so they live in this symbiotic relationship. They produce a tree that the flying squirrel can live in. And so this is a kind of ecosystem service because the forest is really relying on services provided by the flying squirrel. Some people have referred to the northern flying squirrel because of this as a keystone species. So just to come back to where I started, which was my interest in assessing the southern flying squirrel, because in 2002, when I started this project, I was interested in understanding whether the species should be listed or it had us, and so I was trying to gather data to help in this reassessment. One of the things that I learned though, so this picture here shows a squirrel that I will call squirrel 2730 because that was the tag number that this squirrel had. We tagged this squirrel with that number. And so in the bottom of this image on the left side, what you see here is a squirrel that has pure white belly fur. So it has got no gray at the base. And so that's a diagnostic of a southern flying squirrel. The northern flying squirrel has this gray base in the fur. So there's white at the tips and gray at the base. And this squirrel, 2730, was the size of a southern flying squirrel. It was an adult because it was in reproductive condition. So we knew it was an adult. It was the size of a southern flying squirrel, but at the same time, it had this gray belly fur. And so this was a bit surprising because we expected that a small southern flying squirrel like this should have pure white belly fur. So we began to get suspicious that maybe this was a hybrid. So there had never been any reports of hybrid flying squirrels. And in fact, it was thought that they couldn't hybridize because of differences in shape of their bacula. But one of the things that I knew in 2002 is that winters, there had been a long stretch of winters that were getting warmer at that point. And the southern flying squirrel was, I suspected, maybe limited by cold temperatures and moving north because of the warm winters. So if winters are going to, push them back because it's cold and it had been warm for many years, then maybe they were able to spread north, and that could set the conditions for hybridization. And in fact, in 2003, we did a much bigger survey and we found flying squirrels. So these solid red symbols show where there were flying squirrels. And this blue line was the northern range limit of the southern flying squirrel that was in the 1988 COSEWIC report that came from a 1986 survey. That survey in 1986 was done by Mark Stab, some of you may know, who's a pretty well-known naturalist in Ontario. He wrote the 1988 status report. Anyway, when we went back out in 2003, we found that the squirrels had spread north by 240 kilometers. So they were all the way up in Temagami, much farther north than we expected to find them. And I'll note that, just to go back to my comment about the winters, the average daily minimum temperature in January for several years leading up to that 1986 survey I showed you, this was right around where the range limit of the squirrels were in 1986. And this coincided with the minus 18 degrees Celsius isotherm at that time. But prior to the surveys that I did in 2003, the minus 18 isotherm had moved way up there. So the temperature had warmed in the winters for those years preceding the squirrels. So really temperature seemed to be shifting and allowing them to spread north. So that can promote the idea of what we call secondary contact. So if you imagine that this pink range here is the southern flying squirrel and the blue is the northern flying squirrel, and they've evolved in isolation from one another because of the effects of glaciers, right? So there's this glacial, we call that glacial vicariance, where the two species are on either side of a glacier. If the glacier is removed and the species spreads north, and so they're now in contact, that is what we call secondary contact, and that's a potential hybrid zone because those two species evolved in the absence of one another, and so there's an absence of reproductive barriers. So reproductive barriers between species evolve in the presence of contact. If there's no contact, then there's really no reason to see a hybrid zone in the absence of those barriers. And in fact, that's what we have in central Ontario, right around here between Port Hope and Algonquin Park. We have this hybrid zone which has formed because of increased amounts of sort of secondary contact between the two species. We published a paper in 2010 that described all this. And we found, but using genetics at the time, that about 4% of the squirrels that we sampled, from many hundreds of squirrels that we sampled, 4% were hybrids. So these are squirrels who had one parent that was a northern flying squirrel, and one parent that was a southern flying squirrel. And the offspring of those squirrels are called hybrids. We also found some offspring that were introgressed squirrels. So those are squirrels that had a hybrid parent that was able to reproduce with one of the other two species. So what that confirms is that the hybrids are able to reproduce. So they're fertile. This was a pretty big story at the time because right around then, there was this kind of theoretical notion that climate change, should species distribution shifts, increases in secondary contact, that might lead to like a kind of genetic homogenization among species. And our flying squirrel study was one of the first concrete examples where we could link climate change to hybridization. And so there was lots of media coverage and that sort of thing. And that has led to a long string of media and documentaries. We had a group come from Germany to film flying squirrels in the Kawartha Highlands area. And they filmed a thing you can see on YouTube. You can go on YouTube. I put the link there on the bottom. And this is, if you look up it's right here, Fascination Earth Canada. There's a documentary that has about 800,000 views right now that has a nice section of filming our flying squirrels. We recently filmed it, and we've had the Discovery Channel and various other documentary filmmakers out to film the flying squirrels, the hybrid flying squirrels in the Peterborough, Kawartha area. I just wanted to point out this one documentary because I'm going to show you a quick video. This is a group from the UK. Film. See that they have a little terrarium set up, and they filmed a bunch of close-up footage of this squirrel in the terrarium. These are grad students, and these are the two filmmakers. And it's pretty interesting how they get the footage. But there's another shot of the squirrel in the terrarium. So what I'd like to do now, they filmed this documentary called Canada, A Year in the Wild, and there's a 2-minute video segment that has a great little. It's just a 2-minute video segment, and I'm going to just show it. I realized though that when I shared my screen, I stopped sharing, and then I'm going to click that button, and then I'm going to reshare, and then it'll just come right back to the screen, and I'll show this 2-minute video. So I'm just going to stop the share for a second, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to share the sound. Okay. So you should be able to hear this then when I get to this next screen. Okay, so here we go. Just a 2-minute video.
Elsewhere in the forest, other animals are just waking up. A flying squirrel uses the cover of darkness to avoid birds of prey. She spends the summer hiding nuts and seeds for lean times like these. Her secret stockpiles are far apart. Traveling between them wastes precious energy. But she has that problem licked. Between wrists and ankles, lets her glide. She can clear 300 making long journeys much more energy efficient. With temperatures dropping, the less time she spends outside, the better. So once fully fed, she heads back to her nest, where she can use every calorie she has saved by gliding to keep herself warm.
Okay, so that's great. I really think they did a good job of catching those zoomed in shots of the squirrel, even though it was in its terrarium. It was pretty impressive. We know that they hybridize, and so we were interested as a research question in trying to better understand why they were hybridizing, what conditions would lead. I mean, we know about the secondary contact, but we wanted to know what were the actual behavioral conditions that would lead to hybridizing. One of the things that was a pretty clear hint, though, we discovered in 2004. So in 2003, we had seen this big range expansion of about 240 kilometers. We went back in 2004 and resurveyed those same sites, and we found that, in fact, the southern flying squirrel range had contracted by about 200 kilometers in one winter. And that was because January of 2004 was a very cold winter. And that led to a big range contraction because the squirrels simply couldn't survive the cold temperature that far north. And so there was mass mortality of flying squirrels north of that. So that underscores just how important winter is to flying squirrels and their ability to survive the winter. So that became a focus of our research question. Flying squirrels live in tree cavities mostly. And this is an example of a tree cavity, and there's two flying squirrels you can see sticking their heads out. This one is right inside the cavity, and this one's sticking its head right out. You can see there. And there's a shot of three southern flying squirrels inside a tree cavity. So we know they live in tree cavities. Why do they do that? Well, southern flying squirrels, this is a graph that shows the core temperature. So this is the body temperature of the squirrel in the winter, and this is ambient temperature. So what you see here is this dotted line is southern flying squirrels, and this flat line is northern flying squirrels. And you can see all these hollow symbols here. These are southern flying squirrels. So what happens when the ambient temperature is very cold, southern flying squirrels have a really hard time, because of their small body size, they have a really hard time maintaining a warm body temperature. So they need to huddle together as a group in order to stay warm enough. So we had this research team right around that time that set out to try and understand more about this huddling behavior of the squirrels. And the way we did that was we caught squirrels with live traps, which is sort of the type of stuff we had been doing anyway to do those surveys. And we would mark a squirrel with what we call a passive integrated transponder, which is a microchip, a pit tag, but it's the same type of tag that you would put into a dog in order to scan it and have an ID, right? It's a unique ID that's scannable on this chip. So we just inject that into a subcutaneous injection into the squirrel, and then we can scan the squirrel. Sometimes the squirrels turn the tables on us, so it's but we can take a DNA sample as well. We put a radio collar on some squirrels, and then we can find the tree cavity that they're living in when we release them, and we home in with a radio antenna to find the squirrels. We find that they're in a tree cavity. We know which cavity that they've gone to with the radio collar. So then we can put a little antenna like this. This is a data logging antenna that basically scans the pit tag. So a squirrel with that microchip goes through that scanner, into the tree, and we have a little data logger attached to it. So we can tell which squirrels are going into which trees and who's living with who in the tree cavity. And when we do that, we're able to log all that remotely and then download it onto a computer. And then we can look at the nesting behavior of the squirrels. But we find that in the summer, on average, these are southern flying squirrels, they use on average about 6 nest trees. And those 6 nest trees in the summer are spread over an area of about 2.8 hectares. During the winter, they use a smaller number of trees. So they use about 2.7 over about a 2.1 hectare area. So this is an example for one squirrel that this was in one of our study sites up in the Kawartha Lakes area. So this squirrel, we first collared this squirrel in 2006, and then we put a pit tag on it. And so this is where it spent the winter. These are trees. So these 3 blue diamonds are where that squirrel spent the winter of 2006, 2007. Then it moved over to this set of green trees in the summer of 2007. Then it went in the, it went from winter, and then it went to the pink ones. Then in the summer, it went to the green ones. And then in the next winter, it's over here. And then the next summer, it's over here. And then the winter here. So that's several years of one squirrel. This is 100 meters for just a scale. So you can see this whole life, this area of about 30 hectares or so. And the nest groups, on average, get to be the biggest in the winter. Not surprisingly, they're trying to stay warm. So there's this, the largest group size that we had was 22. So this is the mean group size over different months. And the group sizes are biggest in the winter, particularly in January. The groups are not necessarily kin. We can look at the genetics of the squirrels and find that they're not necessarily nesting with kin. What's most important is nesting with squirrels that are close by during the summer. So what happens, this is just a kind of a schematic, and I'll explain it. This solid line here is just to indicate a group of squirrels that nest together in the winter. But this is a summer territory, okay? So this little schematic here has 6 squirrels, and these 6 squirrels all nest together in the winter. But this is where they are in the summer. Same thing over here, there's 5, and this is a group of 5 squirrels that nest together, and this is where they spend the summer. The reason that they need animals that are close by in the summer to nest together is because they spend the summer caching food. So they're caching a bunch of food through the summer. They can't get too far from that food through the winter. They need to be able to access that. So it only makes sense for them to be nesting with a group of neighboring squirrels, right? Otherwise, they have too far to travel to get to their summer food cache. I just wanted to show you just a little, another little video, and this one is just showing a group of squirrels that are nesting together, and this is a bit of video from the Nature of Things episode that just aired. Those squirrels, again, filmed from our study area, and that's what they do. They form a big huddling pile in the middle to stay warm together. The fact that they're together in the winter leads to an important question, though. Do they go out as a group to forage, or do they forage on their own in the winter? Because that leads to some pretty different sort of life history predictions. So do they forage together or alone? So we did another experiment with the same pit tags, and we put pit tags out on food caches in order to see whether animals are going to those food caches as a group or alone. Generally speaking, we find that most of the time squirrels tend to forage alone. So the main mode is that they nest together, and then they go out on their own to forage back in their summer territory, essentially, where they've cached food. So this is just to build on my schematic. This is in the summer. these squirrels would each have trees on their own territory. They're not really grouping up that much. So those are their summer territories, and they have those trees on their territories. In the winter, these squirrels would group into a smaller number of trees. So you have, you go from these 6 squirrels visiting, a large number of trees to a smaller number in the winter. And the squirrels, generally speaking, have to go farther to get to their food caches in the winter, because they're traveling from a farther distance, because there's just a couple of trees that this big group is using. And that's, in fact, what we see. On average, squirrels in the winter have to travel, at least in our studies, we found that on average, a foraging trip in the winter for a squirrel is about 284 meters. And that in the summer, it's about 168 meters, because they're nesting right close to their food cache in the summer, but they're not necessarily as close to their food cache in the winter. But they're active all winter. They're out there traveling around at night. If it's a really cold night, they might just hold up and not go anywhere. But the first chance that it gets to be warm again, they're going to go and forage. So we learned that squirrels are foraging on their own. They're huddling as a group. They have more than one tree. So they switch trees from time to time. The group will switch. So what happens is they'll go to forage to a different tree. So the question then is that we asked is, how do they know which tree to return to? And so we couldn't figure that out for quite a while, and it was a real puzzling question, because it didn't make sense that they would just be going around prospecting every tree. So we got the idea that maybe they're vocalizing. You don't really hear flying squirrels. You can hear some high-pitched things once in a while, but not very often. They tend to be very quiet. But we took squirrels into a sound lab and recorded them, and we learned that, in fact, flying squirrels do produce ultrasound. This was unknown before our studies. And we actually can find that this is one example with harmonics, but there's other vocalizations that we've recorded that are pure ultrasound. So 50 kilohertz, for example, that humans can't hear at all. So they're calling to each other on a frequency that we can't hear. And owls can't hear that either. Owls can usually hear something up to about 20 kilohertz. So they can't hear ultrasound. So flying squirrels, owls are the main predator of flying squirrels. And I've showed a saw-whet owl here, but which is a predator. The really most important predator is the barred owl. And they also can't hear ultrasound. I just didn't have a great barred owl picture. Question though, about vocalizations that we were curious about was whether squirrels are echolocating, or is it just about social communication? We were pretty sure they use social communication. So we've done a bunch of studies since we first learned about that. This is Sasha Newer, who's a PhD student at Trent, and she's been leading these studies to try and really understand whether flying squirrels echolocate at all. So we've done a bunch of experiments, and to date, we have no evidence of any echolocation. And I'm inclined to say that they don't do that. I think we have enough data at this point to confirm that. But they do communicate socially, partly for this whole notion of rejoining at cavity trees. But we think there's a bunch of other social communication as well. And we've been trying to understand sort of build a library of different calls and tie that to different behaviors. Okay, so really what we think, just to wrap up this question about why the squirrels hybridize, what we think is that squirrels are the flying squirrels, the southern flying squirrel especially, is very subject to mortality in the winter. There's a strong imperative so this requirement to socially nest can promote hybridization at the range edge, because mating in flying squirrels occurs during late winter. So right now, here we are in late February, squirrels are starting to mate. And so if they're in a nest, it's cold out still, they're in a group nest, that's who they're going to mate with. So if you're one southern flying squirrel living in a matrix of northern flying squirrels at the edge of the range, you're gonna nest with northern flying squirrels. You're gonna nest with whoever you can. Otherwise, you're gonna die because it's too cold. So this kind of mechanism can promote heterospecific nesting, which can lead to hybridization. And there's a lack of evolved reproductive barriers, can lead to this hybridization. What we expect in the long term. So there's going to be one of two things that occurs. These hybrids are going to be selected for, and there's going to be some advantage, some selective advantage, or else the animals that are hybrids would be selected against. If the hybrids are selected against, that's, over time, that would produce reinforcement of the species barriers, of the reproductive barriers. So the reinforcement of the boundaries between the two species. So because hybrids being selected against, what's going to happen is there's going to be divergence between the two species over time, because the ones that chose to mate together are going to have low fitness. The ones that chose to not mate together will have higher fitness. And that will lead to a divergence over time. So we either expect to see this divergent selection in the hybrid zone and increased reinforcement, or else we're going to see selection for and because of gain some kind of advantage. So that's the kind of thing that could lead to selection for some southern trait, and in fact lead to hybrids becoming more dominant form, a variant, let's call them. One of the ways that we're trying to explore that is with developing a flying squirrel genome. So we've actually produced a flying squirrel genome with research collaborations, and currently trying to get some deeper understanding of traits of importance in flying squirrels. So just to wrap up what I wanted to talk about, speaking of traits, I showed you those black lights in the very first slide. Well, the reason those black lights are important is that we recently learned, incredibly, that flying squirrels are fluorescent. You may have seen some of this in the news. It wasn't my discovery, it was some others that discovered that, but I was amazed to learn it. And we really don't know why they're fluorescent. It might be just an artifact. It might be something that is a trait, that's an adaptive trait. But when that CBC crew was around filming the nature of things, we were able to, for the first time ever, record gliding flying squirrels that were fluorescent. That's what the lights are for. So we set up these black lights and ran them off a generator and tried to record gliding squirrels. So I have here about 1 minute of footage. This is just like an edited montage of gliding squirrels, and there's no sound. So I'll just play it, it'll be quiet, and you can just watch the squirrels. One of the things that I would point out for you to watch for is just how much work it is for the squirrels to glide. You get the sense that, oh, they're gliding, it's effortless. But when you see, what you'll see in this footage is that the squirrels have a lot of work going on to try and stay balanced in the air. And this footage is the best footage I've seen for really showing just how dynamic the gliding behavior is in the air. So I'll just play this for about a minute. Okay, this squirrel takes, just so you don't think this film is paused, the squirrel's just sitting on this branch for a minute. And it's gonna glide here in a second. You can see the flickering black light. There's a couple of really good pink ones coming up. That one's really pink. And there's my now 19-year-old son, who still comes out and helps us squirrel trapping. So I showed you a slide of him just early on when he was a young fellow. So it's I would say, with respect to understanding what's going to happen in the long run with the northern flying squirrel, well, we still don't know whether the northern flying squirrel will be replaced by some hybrid form, or whether we'll see the reinforcement of reproductive barriers between the northern flying squirrel and the southern. Selection takes a bit of time to happen, and this is unfolding right now as we speak in central Ontario. So it's something we continue to observe to see what will happen. And with that, I would like to acknowledge some collaborators of mine who've been partners in this research over the years. And I especially need to thank all these graduate students that I've worked with at Trent University and the University of Manitoba, who've been instrumental in all of this research. And that's my last slide. So I'd be happy to take any questions for folks who have questions. Maybe I'll stop sharing as well, just so that we can go back to the video screen.
Questions, anybody?
If I could ask one question, how do you catch the flying squirrels to do what you do?
I am sorry, I missed the first half of your question.
How do you capture a flying squirrel in Kawartha to do the studies that you do?
Well, it's not that difficult. You know, we use a small box trap, like a cage trap. It's a Tomahawk Model 102, usually, that we're using. And we attach it to, we make a little shelf bracket. So we buy just a shelf bracket from a hardware store. And we put a little board on the end of the shelf bracket.
It is.
And we screw it to the tree, and we bait that with sunflower hearts. So like whole raw sunflower seeds, and that's it. We usually don't trap squirrels overnight. Typically, like, we want to have a light touch with the long-term study that we're doing, and so we generally would go we set traps at dusk, so they come out at dusk basically. So we would go, like, at this time of year, we would have traps set by 5:30, and then we check them by 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we just have a loop that we would walk, and we'd walk that like every hour and check the traps until 10 o'clock, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I saw a chat question, I think, flash up, but I didn't get to read it.
That's Luke. That's that's Mark. Yeah.
Please.
I'll just open the chat because
Louise, you can't hear you.
Can one find them? So that question is about where in Peterborough can one find flying squirrels or shelf bracket? I think flying squirrels probably. We've done a lot of trapping around Peterborough, just as part of, like, ongoing research with Trent students and that sort of thing. And in Peterborough, there are northern flying squirrels. So it's quite interesting because there are pockets of northern flying squirrels, in areas that you might not expect them, because they're kind of like protected in some sense from the range expansion of southern flying squirrels in these fragmented pockets. So for example, Jackson Park in Peterborough has northern flying squirrels, and that's a spot you'd think would have southern flying squirrels, but it's, I think, just protected enough from this, because of the urban condition, that it hasn't been colonized by southern flying squirrels. Harper Park in Peterborough, which is in the South End, has southern flying squirrels. But very close by in Fleming Forest, just across Greeley Drive, for those who know that area, has southern flying squirrels. Burnham Woods has now southern flying squirrels. I did survey, so the site has turned over to southern flying squirrels. Down in the closer to you folks, I've done surveys in Peters Woods and found that Peters Woods has southern flying squirrels. But the Ganaraska area has both. There's both species in the Ganaraska forest.
Oh, great. Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Courtney. I'm actually, there was an image in the challenge that I'm going to talk about shortly after this. It was one of my, an image we took a few years ago of a flying squirrel. For those of you who participated in the challenge, that was the answer for that one. And it was in around, it was taken in March at a feeder in the daytime. So is that kind of like a common sight for them in the daytime around that time? Like at a feeder?
Well, it's unusual to see one in the daytime. Honestly, they're quite highly nocturnal. So I think to see one in the day is unusual.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not unusual to see them at feeders. They'll go, would expect that squirrel probably lives close to that feeder, maybe it was out in the day just because they didn't see it as risky. Normally they wouldn't be gliding around during the day.
Okay.
Another chat question here. How do flying squirrels do on the ground if they can glide about 90 feet and the forage areas are larger? Oh, well, so there's trees that are shorter than 90 feet away. So they don't have to ever come on the ground, That's why they need forest. And that, so they basically don't do very well on the ground and they live in forested areas. But they can go to the top of trees and just scamper through the canopy. They actually go, if the trees get to be too far apart, like you would find actually in quite an old forest, the trees get to be quite far apart. They might glide and then glide to the base of one tree and then go up, and then they glide to the base of the next tree and then go up. That's pretty common to see them do that sort of thing. So like a zigzag. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a minute, Jeff. There.
Oh, is it common for a flying squirrel to try and eat through a screen at the cottage? I wouldn't think so. I mean,
this was weird. I fought this squirrel for about 2 hours at my father's cottage about 30 years ago at Stony Lake. And he kept on eating through the screen and trying to get in at us. I don't know whether he was rabid or whether, finally, unfortunately, in order for us to get, I fought him from 1 o'clock in the morning until about 2 to 3 o'clock. And I finally went outside and I ended up bashing him because he just, I was afraid for my wife because he was acting very, very strange. Is that common?
Well, no, first of all, squirrels generally, if they get rabies, they don't live very long. So typically it's unusual to see, a rabid squirrel. It could be the case that was a female squirrel and there were some pups somewhere close by and that squirrel was trying to get to. That would be my first guess. Although of course I didn't see the squirrel, so I couldn't say for sure. But they have a second litter in the summer oftentimes.
Yeah.
And they can be nesting in a building somewhere.
Yeah. It was really weird. It was scary at times because he would get in. He got into our cabin and he would be sort of jumping around, scaring my wife, needless to say. But anyway.
Well, they do when they're inside like that, they do have a kind of like they're not very genteel about the way they flop around, you know. They're not very good inside a building.
But I'd never, and we were at my father's cottage, I guess, about 50 years. And in that whole time, I don't think we, except for this one time, we ever saw a flying squirrel in that area in Stony Lake.
Well, they're there. They'll be out there at
Well, I'm
night.
sure they are. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is the color important to differentiate northern and southern? Somebody told me that southerns are gray and northerns are red or brown. Is that important?
So I showed a slide earlier on that showed that that flying squirrels have a pure white belly fur. Southern flying squirrels, northern flying squirrels have like a two-tone belly fur, so they have this gray slate base and white tips. That's a very good distinguishing characteristic. You might have some hybrids that have kind of intermediate characteristics, but they're pretty rare overall. So generally speaking, if you ever see a squirrel and you're able to tell that it has either pure white belly fur or this kind of two-tone belly fur, you should be confident in being able to say which species it is.
But then you have to have it in your hand, and I'm talking about the back of the squirrel. Can you see this picture that I took? It was a flying squirrel that came to our
Hold it up a little bit higher. A little higher, a little higher.
Higher.
Oh yeah.
And it came into this feeder.
Yeah.
And it's more brown than gray on its back.
I see on the back. Yeah, that's to me that's less clear. You know what I see from that squirrel though, it has a very distinct black stripe on the side. And and just for me, because I've seen so many of those squirrels, that looks like a southern flying squirrel to me.
Okay, and it was very little.
Yeah, that would be a southern flying squirrel. And I tend to tell based on that color on the side, that black stripe. The color on the dorsal pelage, it's not very diagnostic. I would say if anything, the southern flying squirrel tends to be a little bit grayer, and you can get northern flying squirrels that are a little bit more brownish or reddish on the dorsal pelage, but it's not totally diagnostic. It's a bit of a variable kind of trait.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions?
Yes. What do the hybrids eat? If the southern flying squirrels eat mast and the northern ones eat fungi, what do the hybrids eat?
Well, it's a great question. It's something we're studying presently, and I don't really have an answer. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap between the hybrids. In fact, you know, southern flying squirrels eat some fungus, northern flying squirrels eat some nuts. So it's, you know, they integrate even between the two species. So almost certainly the hybrids are just kind of in the middle there somewhere, eating both of these types of things. Yeah, but we don't know. Like, it's a great question that we are interested in is, let's suppose that just to speculate, let's suppose all the northern flying squirrels became hybrids over time, right? There's mass integration. That's what we call a hybrid swarm. If that happened, what would happen to this nitrogen fixing ecosystem service? Would the hybrid swarm lead to more preference for fungus and consequently having less kind of this nitrogen fixing activity? You know, that would be problematic if that was the case for forest growth. Forest would become more nitrogen limited if that happened. And so that's something we're interested
Thank you.
in, you know, it's time to answer that.
Any other questions? I guess not. Anyway, Jeff, thank you very, very much. Much appreciated.
No problem.
And it was a fascinating talk. Anyway, well done. Thank you.
Thanks. Glad you enjoyed it.
Jeff.
Great.
Have a good evening.
And I now turn it over to Mr. Frank Godfrey, our newly elected president.
Thank you, Tim. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
You can. Okay, at this time, I'm going to, it's my pleasure to introduce Courtney Drew, who developed the 3-part For the Love of Nature challenge, and she will conduct the draw for the grand prize. So Courtney, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney, and like Frank said, I am the organizer of the For the Love of Nature challenge. And I just wanted to thank, first off, all the participants who took part in the challenge, and for the support from the executive, and also a word of thanks to Don McLeod. I don't know if he's here tonight, who
he was.
Who helped me set up and organize the photo gallery for the January challenge. And then thanks to Dan Kelly, who kept me updated on the amount of money being raised. And also to anyone who donated prizes as well. Those were a huge help as well. And tonight, like Frank mentioned, we are drawing the grand prize, the winner of the grand prize, which is a spotting scope valued around $1,600.
Oh.
I have a hat here with all of the names in. So for in order to draw it, anyone who participated had their name entered in, and if you participated more than once, your name will be entered in more than once. So I will draw this right now. Drum roll. The winner is Tom and Jenny Jackman. Congratulations on your anniversary too.
Happy anniversary.
Nice.
Okay, so I will get in touch with you and figure out how we are going to get that to you. And I also have a gift certificate, $100 gift certificate to the Green Canoe. Richard helped me obtain that as well as a prize. So I will draw a name for that as well. The winner, Jamie Inglis. Congratulations. I will also be in touch on that as well. And lastly, I have a duck carving, a handmade duck carving as well as a third prize. So I'll draw a name for that. Simone Murray. So you are the winner of that as well. So congratulations. And so in total, throughout the 3 challenges, we raised a grand total of $1,085 approximately. So very successful. So once again, thank you to everyone, and those will be going towards the educational scholarships. And so that concludes the challenge. Once again, thank you to everyone for participating and making it a success. My website will still be up. So for those of you who want to look at the photo submissions from the January challenge and the winners as well, those are still there. I will also put up the slide presentations for the December challenge and the February challenge that just happened, and the answers for those as well. So you can scroll through and see all 3 of the challenges. And so thank you very much, everyone.
Well done,
Thanks,
Courtney. You deserve a lot of credit.
Tremendous job, Courtney. I think everybody can agree that we're very impressed with what you've produced here, and certainly the money that you've raised for the club, for the scholarship. So thank you very much. So, I guess the next item of business is meeting. The next meeting is Friday, March the 26th 2021 on Zoom, of course. Hopefully that doesn't last forever. Topic will be a day in the life of a shorebird. We've got lots of shoreline in Northumberland County. And our speaker is Helen Jameson. Of course, everyone is welcome. Members are all welcome for that. So that's about all I wanted to really say on that account. I want to emphasize, a couple of people mentioned it earlier, I guess in the pre-meeting that we had, about they haven't paid up, whatever. So we really encourage folks to renew their memberships, and we kind of would like to see it happen early in the year. This is our main source of revenue. We can't do much without that. And so if you could do that, that would be wonderful. We'd really appreciate that. And before I just close off for the night, I just want to recognize Tim Tottenham. Tim was president for 3 years, and I worked alongside with Tim. And before that, Brian Maxwell for 3 years as president, and learned a lot from Brian. So I really want to thank those two gentlemen. They carried the club through some interesting times. We're in interesting times right now with COVID and stuff. So, you know, just being able to do these Zoom meetings is great. It's keeping the club alive. And we're really feeling that there's a lot of interest in Willow Beach Field Naturalists, new people coming, joining our club and so on and so forth. So, so that's great. And so in the next curlew, I will introduce all of the members of the board, what they do. I'm not going to take up any more time tonight. It's getting on. So I guess at that point, I'm going to, unless anybody's got anything they'd like to offer, I'll bring the 2021 Willow Beach Field Naturalists AGM to a close. And obviously thank everyone for attending, and good night.
Good night from Nova Scotia.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Night.
John Boy.
Boy.
Is John Boy Frank?
Oh, yeah.
There's Louise.
And thanks again, Jamie.
Oh, no.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, no problem.
You guys are marvelous.
English.
We couldn't do this without you.
Will I just exit out here?
Yep, you can do that.
Oh, there it is. It's right here. Oh, leave.
And then I think you have to confirm it, I believe. I'm not
Leave
sure.
me.
All right, I guess we're ready to end this meeting.
I guess we are, James.
Cool.
You didn't by chance record it, did you?
Oh yes, I did. I need to stop that
Oh, you
recording.
did. Oh, wow. Good for you. Thank you.